Let me hit you with something honest right out of the gate. Their biggest fear isn't that you've stopped loving them. It's that you were the first one to truly move on. Not on the outside, but in the quiet places. In your mind, in your heart. That you reached peace before they even knew the war was over. That idea alone, it rattles people. But here's the problem. Too many of us have been fed the wrong story. We're taught to believe that if we're quiet, patient, and hurt long enough, they'll come back. That our suffering earns their attention. That holding on somehow proves our worth. But what if that's the lie that keeps you stuck? What if letting go before they do is the most powerful thing you could possibly do? That's what this video is about. Because there's something magnetic, almost haunting, about someone who moves on without needing to make noise, without needing to be seen doing it. It's not a performance, it's not revenge. It's the silent confidence of someone who no longer seeks validation from a person who once felt essential. And that shakes them to their core. So if you've ever been on the edge, wondering when they'll finally notice you're gone, or why they suddenly come back when your heart has already left the building, I promise this will give you answers. Not just emotional ones, but stoic ones, rooted in self-mastery and inner calm. These aren't games, these are truths. 7 of them. And by the end, you won't just understand what their fear is, you'll understand why your healing is the most powerful response you'll ever give. Stay to the end. It gets deeper than you think. 1. The ego hit they didn't see coming. They didn't expect you to move on. Not really. They might have told themselves it was possible, but deep down, they didn't believe it. Not when they left you with unanswered questions, with loose ends, with silent spaces where explanations should have lived. They walked away, maybe clean, maybe messy, but in their mind, there was always a door cracked open. A door where, if they ever chose to peek through again, they expected to still find you waiting on the other side. Not literally waiting with flowers or tears or pleas. No, not like that. But energetically, emotionally, spiritually, waiting in, the way people do when they haven't fully let go. In the way your heart still pauses when their name pops up. In the way your breath still stutters at a memory. In the way you scroll a little slower through their feed, hoping to catch a glimpse of something that says, "I still think of you too." That kind of waiting. That subtle, soul-level holding on. That's what they counted on. And for a while, maybe you were doing just that. Maybe you were holding on, replaying old texts, wondering if they felt the same way, trying to read between the lines of silence, because you're human, because you loved, because connection doesn't dissolve overnight. But then something changed, didn't it? Maybe slowly, maybe suddenly, maybe after one too many nights staring at the ceiling, wondering if you were ever enough. Maybe after realizing they weren't coming back, not in the way you needed. Maybe after waking up one morning and realizing you didn't think about them first thing anymore. Maybe after realizing that your peace had grown louder than your pain. That's the shift they never saw coming. The moment you stopped bleeding internally over what was already over. The moment you stopped mentally chasing someone who wasn't chasing you. The moment you realized that waiting was not loyalty, it was self-neglect. That's the part that hits their ego. Because up until that point, your pain was a kind of praise to them. Your longing was a shrine. Your loyalty, even in their absence, was proof that they mattered more than they should have. Even if they didn't consciously think it, they felt it. They fed off the belief that they had a certain power in your life. Not maliciously, not always intentionally, but power nonetheless. And then silence. Stillness, a detachment not born of bitterness, but clarity. You stopped needing closure. You stopped hoping for a text. You stopped caring who they were dating. You stopped listening to songs that reminded you of them on purpose. You stopped waiting for them to remember how good you were. You remembered it for yourself. That's the moment their ego takes the biggest hit. Because it's not dramatic, it's not messy. There's no final argument, no final plea, no cathartic goodbye scene like in the movies. There's just a slow removal of their emotional footprint from your life, a gentle erasing, a soft unfollowing, not always on social media, but from your inner world. And that silence is terrifying, because it's real, because it's not performative, because it doesn't beg them to notice, it dares them to. And here's the twist. Even if they walked away thinking they had the upper hand, your healing destabilizes them. Your growth, your detachment, your peace, it reflects something uncomfortable back at them. It says, "You didn't break me." It says, "You weren't my only source of light." It says, "I've outgrown needing to be chosen by someone who was never ready for me." And maybe they start watching again, quietly, checking your stories, asking mutual friends, reading your captions like they're encrypted. Maybe they even come back around with vague apologies or casual check-ins. But you feel the shift now. You don't tremble. You don't race to reply. You don't fantasize about fixing what broke you. You've made peace with the version of them that existed in the past. You've let them stay there. And that's the ego hit they didn't expect, because they were ready for you to be angry, for you to chase, for you to react. But they weren't ready for indifference. They weren't ready for the day your eyes stopped searching for them in every room. They weren't ready for the moment your love stopped needing to prove itself. That's what happens when you move on first. When you move on emotionally before they even realize, there's nothing left to come back to. And I'm not talking about rebounds or distractions or performative independence. I'm talking about real inner movement, the kind that makes peace with the past, the kind that no longer centers someone who chose to exit your life, the kind that puts your own heart back into your own hands. That's the shift that scares them, because it leaves them with only their choices and no one to absorb the fallout. Stoicism teaches us to master our internal world, to make peace with what we cannot control, to act with virtue, not vengeance. When you apply that to relationships, it looks like this: not punishing them, not proving anything to them, but simply removing their emotional access to you. That's Stoic strength, that's Stoic love. Not passive, not bitter, but wise. When you move on first, you reclaim what they quietly assumed they'd always possess: your attention. And when that attention dries up, when the emotional well no longer overflows in their direction, they notice. Sometimes immediately, sometimes slowly, but they notice. And it shakes something inside them, because they realize you weren't dependent. You were choosing them. You were giving them access. And now that you've stopped, now that you've walked, not just physically but emotionally, they feel the weight of their own absence. They feel the consequences of their choices in a way they never expected. And maybe they won't say anything, maybe they'll never admit it, but you'll know. Not because they come crawling back, but because you no longer need them to. Because the version of you that once longed for their presence no longer exists. Because you outgrew the need for their validation. Because your self-worth has come home to you. That's what healing looks like. That's what moving on first feels like. And that feeling, that quiet, grounded, radiant sense of peace, that's their biggest fear come true. Not because you've stopped loving altogether, but because you've started loving yourself more. And nothing threatens an unexamined ego more than someone who no longer centers it. That's the hit they didn't see coming, and that's how you win. Not by breaking their heart, but by no longer letting them break yours. 2. Control was the comfort. They've lost it. There's something almost invisible about the control people believe they have over someone they used to be close to. It's not always loud. It's not always manipulative in a textbook way. Sometimes it's just an unspoken assumption that you'll always care, that no matter where life pulls you both, you'll still be emotionally accessible, that there's a certain gravitational pull that will never let you drift too far from them. And the more they believe that, the more it comforts them, not because they necessarily want to be with you, but because knowing they could, if they wanted to, gives them a sense of control. It's emotional insurance, a backup, a soft place to land if the world gets too cold. And maybe they weren't even fully conscious of it. Maybe they didn't sit around plotting ways to keep you emotionally tethered. But comfort is powerful. And human nature often gravitates toward whatever keeps us feeling safe, wanted, and relevant. So imagine their surprise when you take back your energy. Not in anger, not with a grand declaration, but quietly, calmly, consistently. You stop responding with urgency. You stop reshaping your boundaries to accommodate their uncertainty. You stop entertaining the idea that their attention is worth sacrificing your growth. You stop orbiting them. And that shift is subtle at first, but seismic in its impact. Because what they don't realize is that their sense of control, however fragile or invisible, was never about you. It was about how they saw themselves through you. And when you walk away emotionally, that mirror cracks. Suddenly, they don't get to feel adored by default. They don't get to feel needed by assumption. They don't get to expect warmth where they once left coldness. And for the first time, maybe in a long time, they realize you're not coming back. Not to the same dynamic, not to the same emotional rhythm, not to the same pattern where they're the center of your universe and you're the satellite. And that's terrifying, because control for them was a comfort. Even if they never planned to use it, just knowing they had it made them feel bigger, safer, more in charge. But now, you've rewritten the story, you've taken the pen back, you've stopped making them the plot twist in every chapter of your healing. And they feel it, that strange ache of being unneeded, the hollow echo where your emotional dependence used to live. It stings, because it wasn't just about affection, it was about position, status, ego, relevance, and now, all of that is slipping through their fingers. Not because you're trying to make them jealous, not because you've rushed into someone new, but because you've reclaimed your own power. And let's be real, when someone's comfort depended on your continued attachment, your liberation feels like betrayal. Not because you've hurt them, but because you've stopped centering them. That's the part they never prepared for. That they would become irrelevant, not through rejection, but through indifference, through your steady return to self, through your refusal to let their presence or absence define your worth. And let me be clear, this isn't about bitterness. This isn't about pretending you don't care. Stoicism doesn't teach us to harden. It teaches us to clarify, to untangle where we've placed our power, to take full ownership of what's within our control and surrender what's not. And in relationships, that looks like this: no longer bending over backward to hold space for someone who repeatedly walks out. No longer shrinking yourself to be digestible. No longer performing pain to stay connected. It's about choosing inner steadiness over external approval, choosing truth over hope, choosing yourself over the illusion of closeness. And yes, it hurts at first. That's part of the process, because you're not just letting go of a person, you're letting go of the version of you who thought they were the only one who could make you feel whole. But what replaces that ache is something much deeper: sovereignty, stillness, strength. And if you're watching this and thinking, God, I needed to hear this, then like this video and comment #1 right now. Because this is the kind of shift that changes lives. And if you want more of these conversations, the ones that cut through the noise and speak to your soul, then subscribe, not just for content, but for clarity. Because the more we step into this kind of truth, the more we build Stoic relationships, rooted, not in control, but in mutual respect and emotional independence. So let me ask you this: what part of you still clings to being chosen by someone who hasn't earned access to your inner world? What story are you still telling yourself about why their attention equals your value? And most importantly, what are you ready to reclaim? Because the moment you reclaim your peace, their illusion of control starts to crumble. And maybe they'll try to rebuild it. Maybe they'll test the waters with old patterns, soft texts, familiar flirtations. But this time, you won't bite. Not because you're angry, but because you've tasted something better. A life where your emotions don't depend on someone else's validation. A life where you're no longer a supporting character in someone else's story. A life where you understand that true connection cannot coexist with one-sided control. This is the essence of Stoicism, not detachment for the sake of pride, but detachment for the sake of freedom. Emotional freedom. And that freedom is a revolution, not a loud one, but a steady one. The kind of revolution that says, I no longer place my power in your hands. And once you reach that place, really reach it, they feel the void. They feel your absence not just as silence, but as liberation. And it disrupts them, because they can't control what they can't reach. They can't influence what no longer seeks their approval. They can't hold sway over someone who's rooted in self-worth. And whether they admit it or not, that shift rattles them, not because they lost access to you, but because they realize they never had the right to it in the first place. And in that moment, everything changes. The story breaks, the roles reverse. And for the first time, they're the one wondering what went wrong. Not because you left, but because you let go. Not because you found someone else, but because you found yourself. That's the comfort they didn't want to lose. That's the control they never truly had. And that's the freedom they'll never understand unless they do the work themselves. But by then, you'll be gone. Not out of bitterness, but because you've moved on. 3. The power of emotional detachment. Detachment is misunderstood by many. They hear the word and assume coldness, distance, or an unwillingness to love. But the kind of emotional detachment that terrifies the person who once thought they owned a piece of you isn't rooted in rejection. It's rooted in clarity. It's not about building walls to keep others out. It's about recognizing who no longer deserves a seat at your inner table and choosing peace over performance. See, when you were attached, when your emotions swayed based on their texts, their moods, their inconsistency, you were caught in a storm you didn't create, but kept standing in anyway. And it's not that you were weak. You were open. You loved deeply. You believed in potential. You hoped they would change. You thought your patience, your empathy, your willingness to understand would eventually win them over. And in that place, emotional reactions were normal. You'd respond to their withdrawal with anxiety, to their attention with relief, to their breadcrumbs with gratitude. But what happens when you no longer respond at all? Not out of spite, not because you're pretending, but because you've genuinely detached. That's what they can't handle, because emotional detachment, real, internal detachment, isn't about pretending not to care. It's about not being controlled by whether they care or not. It's about living from a center so solid that someone else's presence or absence no longer shakes your foundation. That's when their fear kicks in, because as long as you were reacting, they knew they mattered. As long as your emotions were volatile, as long as you were reaching out, looping thoughts, checking on them, responding with visible disappointment or silent hope, they still held emotional power. But when that power is gone, they're left, facing the silence of their own irrelevance. And that silence is loud. It speaks volumes. It says, you no longer live rent-free in my head. It says, your behavior doesn't dictate my self-esteem. It says, I'm not angry. I'm just done. And nothing is more confusing, more confronting than a person who once cared deeply, who once gave so much of themselves, now sitting in stillness. Not punishing, not chasing, just existing, free from their pull. Because that level of self-mastery can't be faked. You can't pretend to be at peace. You either are or you aren't. And when you are, they'll feel it. They'll feel it in your delayed responses, in your disinterest in rehashing the past, in your unwillingness to reignite what you've already outgrown, in your calm demeanor when they test your boundaries again. They'll sense it in the way you no longer take the bait, in the way you no longer respond to their old patterns with the same emotional intensity. And the most unsettling part? You're not even trying to send a message. You're not doing it to them. You're just being rooted, being whole, being untethered. And that kind of freedom unnerves someone who once saw you as emotionally predictable. When someone loses control of your emotional state, they're forced to confront their own emptiness. They can't project anymore. They can't blame your reaction for their behavior. They can't hide behind the chaos they once created, because now the mirror is clean. Now their reflection is clear. And for some, that's unbearable. But for you, it's liberation. Because emotional detachment isn't the absence of love. It's the presence of wisdom, the wisdom to know what feeds your soul and what drains it, the wisdom to step back, not because you're angry, but because you're aware that staying in the same loop, with the same patterns, with the same person who refuses to meet you where you are is a form of self-betrayal. So you choose a different path, one lined with boundaries, not walls, one grounded in compassion, not resentment, one lit by the quiet fire of self-respect. And that's what Stoicism teaches us, not to suppress emotion, but to observe it, to master it, to refuse to let it master us. In Stoic relationships, detachment doesn't mean disconnection. It means discernment. It means loving without losing yourself. It means showing up fully, but not clinging. And when you embody that, it changes everything, not just in how they see you, but in how you see yourself. You no longer need their attention to feel seen. You no longer need their approval to feel worthy. You no longer seek closure from someone who never gave you clarity. You become your own closure, your own validation, your own anchor. And in that transformation, you become untouchable in the best possible way, not invincible, not hardened, but free. Free from emotional dependency, free from cycles of hope and disappointment, free from trying to prove your worth to someone who couldn't see it. And that freedom is magnetic, not because you want them back, but because now they see what they lost. Someone who loved deeply, who showed up fully, who gave them access to a heart most people would never touch, and they misused it. So now they're left watching you walk away without a storm, without drama, without revenge, just distance, just clarity, just peace. And peace, when it's real, is the most powerful goodbye. It doesn't slam the door, it simply closes it and walks away. And for them, that silence is haunting, because they realize you're not angry, you're just unavailable. Emotionally unavailable to the cycle, unavailable to the drama, unavailable to playing the role they always cast you in. And that's what cuts deepest. Because anyone can leave physically, but emotional detachment, that's a soul-level shift. That's not about where you are, it's about who you've become. And who you've become no longer needs to be chosen by them to feel chosen by life. Who you've become no longer waits for someone else's love to start loving yourself again. Who you've become understands that peace is the highest currency. That inner stillness is more valuable than outer attention. That your healing isn't a weapon, it's a home you built with your own hands. So yes, emotional detachment scares them because it reveals the truth. They never had power. They only had access. And that access was a gift you've since reclaimed. And in reclaiming it, you've created space for something new. Not necessarily someone new, but something. Self-respect, purpose, alignment, the kind of clarity that only comes after the storm. That's the power of emotional detachment. And that's why they fear it so much. Not because it's cruel, but because it's irreversible. 4. The mirror moment. They see themselves. There comes a point, after you've stopped chasing, after the silence becomes your new language, after you've found comfort in your own company, when they look at what's left, and all they see is themselves. No more distractions, no more power plays, no more games to validate their self-worth through your reactions. Just them, just their choices, just the raw reflection of who they were when they had access to your heart. This is the mirror moment, and let me tell you, it's not gentle. When you've moved on first, not just physically but internally, when your growth isn't a strategy but your new reality, it puts pressure on the narrative they were trying to protect. Because as long as you were stuck in the past, they could tell themselves that maybe they were right, that maybe you were too much, that maybe they weren't the problem, that maybe you would have never walked away first. But when you do, when you truly detach and rise, they're left with a version of events that doesn't paint them in a flattering light. And now they're staring into a mirror that doesn't lie. And it's not a mirror you hold up to them with accusations or judgment. It's the one they walk into on their own, once your absence makes space for truth. That mirror shows them who they were when they were careless with your heart. It shows them the opportunities they ignored, the love they couldn't receive, the empathy they mistook for weakness. And in that moment, they're not looking at you. They're looking at themselves. It's uncomfortable, it's heavy, because for the first time, they have no distraction, no scapegoat, no drama to blur the truth. You're not there to argue. You're not waiting for an apology. You're not hanging around hoping they'll finally get it. You've moved on, and in that void, their reflection gets clearer. They see the patterns they repeated. They see how they misread your kindness. They see how they confused your patience for permission. They see how they treated your loyalty like a guarantee instead of a gift. And the worst part, there's nothing they can do to unsee it. It sticks because it's not about you anymore. It's about what your absence reveals. That's why your healing feels like punishment to someone who refuses to do the inner work. Because your distance forces them to reckon with their own. You didn't make them feel small, you just stopped making them feel big. You stopped inflating their sense of importance by constantly proving your love. And now that you're not around, to do the emotional labor, they're faced with the truth. They were never ready for someone like you, and they know it, not all at once. Sometimes the awareness creeps in slowly, a memory here, a regret there, a sudden realization when they see you smiling without them, when they see you not just moving on, but growing. When they realize the version of you they thought would always be around has evolved into someone they can no longer reach. Not because you're hiding, but because they've lost the emotional access they used to take for granted. That's the part that stings the most. Because for the first time, they realize you were never the weak one. You were never the clingy one. You were the one who saw their potential and loved them anyway. And they ran, or ghosted, or minimized it. And now they're haunted not by your presence, but by what they see in your absence. This is the consequence of their own actions, and it's a consequence you didn't have to deliver. Life did that for you. Their biggest fear isn't that you hate them, it's that you've outgrown the need to explain, that you've stopped arguing your worth, that you no longer see them as the center of the universe you once revolved around, and that you've replaced them not with a person, but with purpose. That's a mirror no one wants to stand in front of unless they're ready to grow. And most people aren't. So they panic, they try to reinsert themselves, they may reach out casually, comment something vague, send a memory, test the water. Not because they've changed, but because the mirror is too much to handle. And they think your presence might make it stop. But you've changed, you've outgrown emotional loopholes. You've transcended the dynamic. You're not trying to be right anymore. You're trying to be real, real with yourself, real with your boundaries, real with what love should feel like. And this is the essence of Stoicism, not a rejection, a feeling, but the ability to respond rather than react, to see clearly without distortion, to love without attachment, to let go without drama. Stoic relationships are built on reflection, not projection, and you, my friend, have become a mirror yourself. You reflect back to them everything they couldn't face while they were with you, not because you're trying to prove anything, but because the truth just sits there now, unbothered, undeniable. And the more they look, the harder it becomes to pretend. And if you're still here, still watching, still nodding along with this because it feels like I'm describing your exact story, then I want you to take a second, like this video, and comment number 1 if this is speaking to your soul. Subscribe if you want more of these moments, these mirrors that help you reclaim your strength and purpose, because this is more than a video, it's a turning point. And if you feel that, don't scroll past it. Don't dismiss it. You're not crazy for feeling what you feel. You're waking up, and waking up hurts sometimes, because you're seeing yourself for the first time too. Not the version who begged, who waited, who felt invisible. The version who survived, who stood back up, who walked away. And now when they look in the mirror, they see you. They see what they gave up. They see what they were too distracted or too broken to hold. And they have to live with that now. That's the mirror moment. That's why they fear your healing, not because it's loud, but because it's honest, and honesty has a way of echoing long after you've gone quiet. 5. Comparison creeps in. Once you've moved on, really moved on, not just changed your relationship status or unfollowed their social media, but shifted something permanent in your soul, something strange begins to happen on their end, and it's often silent, subtle, and deeply uncomfortable for them. It's called comparison, and it creeps in when they least expect it, because while you're outgrowing, evolving, expanding your mind, recentering your identity, and finally breathing from a space that no longer aches for them, they're still watching, maybe quietly, maybe anonymously, maybe even unconsciously, but they're observing what life looks like now that they're no longer in it. And here's what they see: peace, not perfection, but peace. Not that you don't have bad days, but your entire world no longer rotates around their shadow. You're grounded, present, and unapologetically becoming someone they no longer recognize, not because you're trying to prove anything, but because you've finally chosen yourself. And as they observe you, that comparison begins. Whether they're with someone new or still floating through a series of temporary distractions, the truth starts to whisper, it's not the same. Maybe they're laughing with someone else. Maybe they're posting pictures with them. Maybe they're telling themselves it's real. But deep down, they know the emotional safety you offered, the loyalty, the depth, it's not something they can recreate just because they found someone new. Because relationships aren't duplicated, they're earned. And what you gave came from your core, not from a need to perform or please, but from a place of genuine love. And that authenticity isn't easy to replace. So now they begin comparing the way you listened, the way you stayed when things got hard, the way you challenged them, not to break them, but to help them grow, the way your presence calmed the chaos they carried, the way your absence feels sharper than expected, and what once felt like freedom to them, walking away, detaching, leaving things unresolved, now feels like emptiness. Because now, in the quiet, they start measuring what they had against what they're settling for. And if they're honest, the scales don't balance. They notice it in moments. Maybe in the way their new connection lacks depth. Maybe in the way their jokes don't land the same. Maybe in the way their thoughts still wander back to you when they're lying in bed next to someone else. Because comparison isn't logical. It's emotional. It doesn't wait for a breakup to kick in. It happens when the heart feels the contrast. And your healing, your glow, your steady rise, that becomes the new standard in their mind. But by then it's too late, because you've stopped needing to be seen. You're not performing your piece, you're just living it. And that kind of authenticity creates a quiet storm in someone who left expecting to be missed forever. Suddenly, they're the one watching. They're the one wondering. They're the one feeling the sting of irrelevance. And maybe they won't say anything. Maybe they'll try to suppress it, but comparison is a thief of comfort. It steals the ease they once felt. It reminds them of what they gave up. And the deeper you go into your healing, the louder that contrast becomes, not for you, but for them. Because now they're living in the gap between who they were with you and who they are now. The gap between the life they had and the one they thought they wanted. The gap between the way you loved them and the way they're being loved now. And it hurts. Not because they hate where they are, but because they realize where they could have been. And that's a realization that doesn't fade easily. It lingers, it grows. And it shows up in ways they didn't expect, through music, memories, subtle comparisons they don't even want to admit. And while they compare, you continue. You keep evolving, exploring, expanding your life in directions they'll never be part of. Not because you're being spiteful, but because they made a choice, and now so have you. That's what Stoicism teaches us, not to regret the past, but to learn from it. To let the pain refine us, not define us. To stay grounded in what we can control and surrender what we can't. And in the context of Stoic relationships, that means not dwelling on what they think, feel, or regret. It means anchoring yourself so deeply in your own journey that their comparison no longer concerns you. You're not here to be a mirror for their growth anymore. You're not here to be the one who shows them what they missed. You're not here to play the part of the one that got away. You're just here to live with truth, with dignity, with purpose. And as you do, the comparison they feel only grows heavier. Because now you're not competing for attention. You're not proving your worth. You're simply being. And that being is enough. And that's what they never expected. That you would become enough without them, that you would stop needing their eyes on you to feel seen, that you would stop needing their approval to feel complete, that you would stop playing small to make them comfortable. And now the roles have reversed. Now they're the ones scrolling, wondering, measuring, comparing, not because you forced it, but because your light, unbothered and undimmed, reveals everything they lost when they stopped choosing you. And this is why healing is never a wasted effort. Because healing isn't just about feeling better. It's about becoming better, stronger, wiser, more you. And in doing so, you make peace with the fact that they may never apologize, that they may never admit what they feel, that they may never close the loop. But you also realize you don't need them to. Their comparison isn't your closure. Their regret isn't your justice. Their realization isn't your reward. Your healing is. Your life is. Your ability to move forward without bitterness is. And the more you lean into that, the more powerful you become. Because your story no longer centers around being chosen. It centers around choosing yourself. And in doing so, you become the standard. Not for them, but for you. And that standard, that clarity, that sense of peace, that's the life they never expected you to live without them. But you are, and it's beautiful. 6. The realization you were the anchor. They didn't realize it at first. In fact, they probably didn't even think twice about what you meant to them when they walked away or treated you as disposable. Because in their mind, you were stable. You were consistent. You were always there. And because you were always there, they believed you always would be. But the truth is, it wasn't your presence they took for granted. It was your stability, your emotional steadiness, your ability to hold space when they couldn't articulate what they were feeling, your capacity to listen even when they didn't deserve to be heard, your strength to love them at their worst, even when they gave you little in return. You weren't just a partner or a friend or a companion, you were an anchor, the person who made the chaos a little more bearable, the one who calmed their storms without needing to announce it, the one who gave them the benefit of the doubt, time and time again. But the thing about being an anchor is this: when the ship decides it wants to float away, it assumes it can just come back and find the anchor waiting. Until one day it returns and the anchor is gone. That's what breaks them. That's what turns their confidence into confusion. Because your energy wasn't just supportive, it was foundational. It grounded them. It held them emotionally, spiritually, mentally. And now that it's gone, they feel it everywhere, in their moods, in their interactions, in the shallowness of new connections, in the way no one else seems to understand them quite like you did. And maybe they don't say it out loud. Maybe they try to replace you. Maybe they pretend nothing's missing, but they feel the shift. They feel the lack of stability that used to come from simply being around you. And it's not because you were perfect. It's because you were real. Stoicism teaches us that true strength is quiet, calm, and consistent. That the strongest person in the room doesn't need to shout, they just need to be. And that's what you were. While they ran, you remained. While they played games, you stood firm. While they withheld, you gave. And now, in your absence, they're learning what true support felt like by experiencing what it feels like to live without it. That's when the realization hits. You were the one person who saw them clearly and didn't flinch. The one who held space without conditions. The one who made their emotional life feel less like a battlefield and more like a home. And now, that home is gone. That peace is gone. That anchor is no longer theirs to lean on. And it's devastating, because it reveals just how much of their identity was wrapped up in being held by someone like you. But now, they're drifting. And every connection they find feels too light, too thin, too conditional. Because they're used to depth, but they only discovered that after you let go. This is what happens when you stop anchoring people who refuse to anchor themselves. When you realize that being someone's emotional foundation while they tear down the structure is not strength, it's self-abandonment. And you stopped, not because you ran out of love, but because you ran out of places to put it where it would be valued. That's the lesson they never saw coming. That someone like you would stop giving, would stop showing up, would stop softening every blow, would stop making excuses, would stop offering unconditional presence to someone who treated it like background noise. Because when you stop being their anchor, they realize how lost they actually are. And maybe they'll call it missing you. Maybe they'll call it loneliness. But deep down, it's something deeper. It's the awareness that they were safe once and they blew it, that they were grounded once and they left it, that they were held once and they mistook that for normal. But your normal was never common. Your love was never ordinary. Your steadiness was never replaceable. And now that you've gone still, they're flailing. Because the truth is, you held the parts of them they hadn't yet healed. You didn't try to fix them. You just made the healing possible. And now they have to figure out how to do it without you, and most don't know how, because your love became a crutch they didn't know they depended on until it was gone. And if you're hearing this right now, and your heart is screaming, "Yes, that's me," then like this video and comment number 1. Let yourself be seen in this truth. And if you're on a journey of reclaiming your own emotional center, then subscribe, because this isn't just a video. It's a mirror. And sometimes we need to see our own strength reflected to believe it's real. What you gave wasn't wasted. What you held wasn't foolish. You were their anchor not because you were weak, but because you were strong. And now you've anchored yourself. You've taken all that stability, all that steadiness, all that soul, and you've poured it inward. That's power. That's peace. That's Stoic love. The kind that doesn't ask for permission to exist, the kind that doesn't chase chaos, the kind that simply is. And that's what they'll miss most. Not your body, not your face, not the conversations, but your energy, your presence, your ability to hold space for their complexity. And they'll spend a long time searching for that again, searching for you, without knowing how to recreate the container you built, and they won't find it. Because you're not something to replicate. You're not a pattern. You're a presence. And they had you. And they lost you. And that's a realization they'll carry quietly, privately, maybe forever. that they once had the anchor, and they let it go. 7. The quiet power of peace. There's something they never expected, something they never prepared for, and it hits harder than your absence, louder than your silence, and deeper than your indifference. It's your peace. Not the kind of fake, surface-level, pretending to be fine. Peace that comes with distracting yourself or faking a glow-up just to get attention. No, this is a different kind of peace. This is the kind that comes from within, the kind that isn't broadcast, the kind that doesn't beg to be seen, the kind of peace that flows from acceptance, from alignment, from the clarity of finally knowing who you are and what you deserve. It's quiet, but it's powerful. And for someone who once thrived on your emotional highs and lows, that quiet becomes deafening, because the version of you they once knew was reactive, emotional, available, a version of you that could be pulled into a storm with just a few words, a single look, a breadcrumb of hope. A version of you who responded to their chaos with urgency, who tried to fix it, hold it, heal it, love it back into shape. But that version of you no longer lives here. That version died the day you decided your peace was worth more than their inconsistency. That version was buried when you stopped giving your energy to people who only took. And what stands in their place is a person they never imagined you'd become. Calm, centered, focused, untethered, not because you stopped feeling, but because you started choosing. And that choice, your peace, is the final break in the illusion they once believed was permanent. It's the shift that confirms you've really moved on, because anyone can fake a rebound, anyone can pretend to be happy, anyone can try to mask their pain with distractions. But true peace, that can't be faked. It can't be forced. It has to be earned. And you've earned it. Through the nights you cried alone, through the mornings you woke up wondering why it wasn't enough, through the hours of questioning your worth, your choices, your story. You earned this peace by going inward, by doing the work, by holding yourself when no one else would, by choosing not to repeat the cycle, by refusing to shrink. And now that you're standing in it, that peace becomes a mirror, a message and a boundary all at once. It shows them what they lost. It reflects back what they gave up. And it blocks anything that doesn't align with who you are now. This is what Stoicism looks like in practice, not just in ideas, but in being. The refusal to let external chaos disrupt your internal clarity. The commitment to live with intention, regardless of what others do or don't do. The decision to protect your peace, even when it means letting go of people you once thought you couldn't live without. And when someone sees you living like that, when they feel the difference between the you who chased and the you who no longer reaches, they feel it in their bones. Because they realize they no longer have the ability to shake you. They can't trigger the old emotional loops. They can't provoke the same need for validation. They can't manipulate or play or nudge their way back into your space. You're not just closed off, you're complete. That's the fear they never say out loud, that you've become someone who doesn't flinch, someone who doesn't explain, someone who doesn't fight to be understood anymore, someone who knows that peace doesn't need an audience, someone who learned that revenge is never as powerful as silence, someone who carries their healing like armor, soft on the inside, impenetrable on the outside. And maybe they smile and pretend to be fine. Maybe they post pictures and pretend to have moved on. Maybe they start something new just to prove they're unbothered. But when they're alone, when it's quiet, when their phone is in their hand and their mind is in the past, what they remember is the version of you they'll never see again. The you that hoped, that waited, that tried. The you who loved them at their lowest. The you who didn't yet realize your own worth, and then the comparison starts, not just between you and whoever came after, but between you and the person you used to be. Because the truth is, even if they saw your value then, they didn't respect it, they didn't rise to meet it. And now that they've watched you become untouchable, not because you're cruel, but because you're healed, they can't unsee the transformation. They can't unfeel what it's like to be irrelevant to someone who once revolved around them. And that's why peace is power, because peace says, I'm good without you. Peace says, you no longer get access to the version of me you once ignored. Peace says, I'm no longer waiting for you to get it. Peace says, I've closed the door from the inside, and no amount of reaching out, no sweet words, no apologies can unlock that door once your peace has taken root. Because it's not just about protecting yourself from them. It's about honoring what you've built in their absence. And you've built something real, a life that doesn't crave chaos, a mind that no longer loops around what-ifs, a heart that knows it is whole, even if no one else is holding it. This is your strength now, and it didn't come easy. It came through pain, through letting go, through facing your own darkness, but you did it. And now, the one who once had so much influence over your emotions doesn't even have a key to your peace. That's what makes it sacred. That's what makes it untouchable. That's what makes it yours. So if you ever doubt it, remember this. The quiet power of peace isn't just your protection. It's your victory. It's the proof that you moved on, not with noise, but with depth. Not with distraction, but with direction. Not to hurt them, but to honor yourself. And if they feel that shift, let them. If they regret what they lost, let them. If they finally see who you are now, let them. But never ever go back to being the person who had to lose their peace just to keep someone, who never planned to stay. You've earned this, you've arrived, and now it's yours to keep. The truth is, nothing shakes someone more than realizing you've moved on before they ever saw it coming. Not because you slammed the door, but because you simply stopped opening it. You didn't make a scene. You didn't try to prove your worth. You just healed, quietly, consistently. And in doing so, you did the one thing they never imagined you would. You outgrew the story they were still trying to control. And now here you are, not broken, not bitter, but better, rooted, focused, calm, and most importantly, free. Free from the narratives that used to hold you hostage. Free from needing their closure, their explanation, their apology. Free from waiting for someone else to see your value when you already live like it's self-evident. That's the power of moving on first, not as a game, not to win, but because it was time. Because your peace mattered more than their presence. Because you chose to stop circling the same loop and started walking toward yourself. And now, every step you take is proof of that decision. So as we close this chapter, let it settle in. Your chest like a quiet thunder, you didn't lose them, they lost you. And the day they realized it, the moment it finally registered that you were no longer theirs, not even in memory, that was the day they faced their biggest fear. If this spoke to something deep in you, if it mirrored the journey you've walked, or the one you're just beginning, do me a favor. Like this video and comment number 1 below. Let your healing be seen. Let your growth be recognized. And if you want more conversations like this, raw, honest, grounded in emotional depth and the timeless calm of Stoicism, subscribe. Because your peace is not the end of the story. It's the beginning of a new one. And you deserve to live it fully. Thank you for being here. Keep choosing yourself. Keep walking forward. And don't ever forget, the quiet power of moving on is the loudest truth they'll ever hear.